Pro. This is called the PD Pro diet, so I'll be presenting some of the information regarding that study. I'm going to do a share screen here so everybody can see. Actually, sorry, just one moment. Jen, let me know when I do this transition if it's if you can see the whole screen here. Does that look good, or does it look like you see the presenter view?
No, I see the participant view.
The
You're
full
good.
screen. Okay, great. Okay. So this is my information and contact information if people do have any questions. And as Jen said, this is going to be a 4-part series. I know that there'll be a lot of material that I'll present today. It's going to be kind of a foundation in terms of what we're going to be covering in more detail over the next 3 weeks. So today we're going to talk about this PD Pro diet, and we'll talk about a few symptoms that I work with and that people have with Parkinson's, and a few strategies. We're going to talk about plant-based diets and how to move more towards that, fighting inflammation, and also brain supportive foods will be our final class. Today, we're going to not only talk about some of the basics of that research, and the side effects, but we'll also talk about some ways to incorporate some of those foods into your daily diet. So as I mentioned, Dr. Mishley, she is a naturopathic physician. She also has a master's in public health and a PhD in nutrition, and has been doing research in Parkinson's for over 20 years. And more recently has been doing this PD Pro research, where she's developed a validated scoring tool where people can track symptoms. And then she also interviews people about what they're eating and how they're living. She's been following about 2,000 to 3,000 people. And she publishes information yearly on what are the trends that she's noticing. So as you can see, she's published, this is one of the papers that she's published, but she's published quite a few over the years. And we'll be focusing mostly on diet, but lifestyle and social factors are also incredibly important. And so you might guess that one of the most influential lifestyle factors is physical activity, but sleep is also very important. And then social factors actually are incredibly important. So there's seems to be a correlation. And what I'm going to be talking about is correlation, not causation. So when we're looking at people who are progressing faster or progressing more slowly in their Parkinson's, we're trying to quantify and look at how are the people eating and living their lives that are progressing more quickly, and how are people that are progressing more slowly, how are they eating and living their lives. And so physical activity, sleep, and then social connection. So being lonely actually is something that is associated with faster progression. So we're not going to be going into those kind of details, but know that those are very, very important, and nutrition is one part. This is just a visual of what this research shows, and so or entails. She has developed an app, which is a Parkinson's symptom tracking app, and all of you are invited to participate in this research. If you want to, you can go to pdsymptoms.com. You can also download the app, and there's 35 questions that can help track severity of your symptoms. And so what she's been able to show and has been able to validate this this research that over time, the way that people are eating and living their lives can actually change the slope of progression. And so she's starting to describe the outcomes of this research as looking at dietary and lifestyle factors that could be disease modifying, where in the past we might think of diet and lifestyle as being something that might help support side effect management and other aspects of quality of life. But now with the years of data that she's collected, and having this be validated by other researchers, and also having an international group of people who are participating in this, she's been able to show that some of these factors might be disease modifying, meaning that it might help with either slowing down or speeding up Parkinson's. Lower scores are better. So if you do take this, or participate in this quiz, or take the do the if you get your score done, if you take the quiz here to see how you're doing, essentially it will give you a score, and the more that you track that over time, you'll be able to actually see what your slope is. And so people who do this frequently will be able to see whether they're progressing more quickly or progressing more slowly. And what she's found in her research is that many people will be diagnosed at a score of about 500. So still in a good range of a good area of health, but that might progress. The average progression is about 38 points per year. And so this progression sort of leads, to about 10 years where people start to enter into the fair zone. But she's been able to see over the years that people have been able to change the trajectory of the slope with some of these things that we'll be talking about during this series. So if you want to participate, go ahead and go to this website, and you can also download this app. She's always interested in having more people participate. This is an example of some of the different questions on the survey. So it's not a quiz, it's a survey. I was having trouble finding that word. But it's essentially 35 questions. And then you'll be able to get a score and see how your disease is progressing over time, and see if some of the things that you might try, how that might affect you as well. So what are some of the aspects of diet that appear to be protective? If we look at the green circles, we can see that there are different colors and there are a lot of different foods in here. So the darker the green, the more the association with slower progression. So fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, nuts, seeds, coconut oil, and red wine. It doesn't mean that if you don't drink red wine that you have to start, but it is an association. Fresh herbs and spices, olive oil, beans, and fish, green tea, and then we also see some millet, quinoa, eggs, and soy. So maybe a little less confidence in terms of the degree that they are supportive, but certainly still have that positive association. And then if we look over here on the orange side, the foods that are associated with the fastest progression, the people who are progressing the fastest would be sodas, fried food, canned fruit, ice cream, milk, beef, and chicken. We also see cheese, butter, yogurt, frozen vegetables, and then we see pork, bread, pasta, and canned vegetables. So a lot of my job working with people around these dietary patterns is asking that, well, what about, and are you sure about, like, I'm sure many of you are having those questions as you're thinking about this or looking at this. So, a lot of people will say, well, why is yogurt there? Why is canned fruit on there? It seems like fruit would be a good thing to have. And one of the things that we don't really know with this is, because of the way the survey is designed, we don't have the data on all of the minor details of differences. Like people might say, well, what about turkey? Is that the same as chicken? So that doesn't show up, and it's probably because people don't eat in this country eat turkey as much as they eat chicken. So there definitely are some ways that you need to look at this that are appreciative of just not, basically we're not able to be really secure that this is causing, right? It's just a correlation, and these are the things that just show up. So Lori always says, I'm just the messenger. I'm just showing you what comes up on the survey. And we do know that dairy products do have an association with Parkinson's disease. And so that's one thing that Dr. Mishley does recommend for people, is to try to minimize or avoid dairy as much as possible. So the, when it comes to things like yogurt, even though that might be good for gut bacteria, having maybe a dairy-free yogurt would be would be more supportive. So these are the foods that we typically try to encourage over here on the green side, and then the foods over here on the orange side are the ones that we try to minimize in people's diets. What else appears to be important based off of her research? So cooking your own food. Cooking your own food allows you to have more control over what is going into your food when you're eating out. Many times the quality of the fats, the quality of the ingredients overall probably have more sugar, more refined carbohydrates, less fiber. There's a lot of aspects. It depends on, what kinds of foods you're getting as you're eating out. But cooking your own food is a lifestyle habit that seems to be associated with slower progression. Sharing meals with others, probably with the social aspect of eating being important. A mostly plant-based diet, we're going to be talking about that in class 2. Organic as much as possible, so there is a correlation between pesticides and Parkinson's disease. Eating minimally processed foods, and then avoiding plastic bottles. We're going to be talking a little bit more in detail about each of these. This is the most current iteration of the scoring tool that Dr. Mishley developed to help people to eat more of the foods that are associated with protection. And because of the strength of evidence in the research that she's done, she's been able to give a point number to some of these different foods. So fruit from a can is almost at the top of the list. It's hard to say exactly what the issue there. It might be the acidity of the fruit interacting with the plastics that line cans and maybe the metals that are in cans. It's hard to say. And then we have fried food, ice cream, diet soda. You can see that if you're going to track on a daily basis, every serving that you have, you would give yourself these points. What you want to do is at the end of the day, you want to have negative points. So as you think of it, almost like if you were going to think of it like money, that this would be, spending money, this would be saving money down here. And so you want to have negative points at the end of the day. And you can also, if you wanted to, see kind of what your averages are by multiplying how many times a day or a week that you might eat something and see what your score is and track that over time. So the goal is to have negative points. And you could see, some people might say, well, does this mean I can never eat chicken? Well, if you have some chicken, if you eat that with maybe, a cup of vegetables, you're going to have negative 60 points, where the chicken is 19 points. And if you have, some nuts and seeds or fresh fruit, or if you add herbs and spices per teaspoon, you can see how easily it might be to have negative points by the end of the day. So I would encourage all of you to use this tool to assess either on a daily basis, or if you wanted to use the modifier and see sort of like on average, whether you're positive or negative. And the more negative you are, the more it's associated with slower progression or changing the slope. And when I say that, it doesn't mean it's a for sure thing that that's going to happen, but it's just that you're going to be eating more similarly to the people who are progressing more slowly or who are actually changing the slope of their progression. We're going to be looking at some dietary patterns in this series as well. And if you are wondering, well, how do I find recipes, or how do I eat in this way? The two diets that are most closely associated with this PD Pro eating pattern are Mediterranean and Mind diet. So I'm pretty sure most people have heard of a Mediterranean diet pattern. The Mind diet is something that's a little bit more recent. It was developed by Walter Willett at Harvard University, and looking at sort of it's very similar to a Mediterranean diet, but it actually includes more leafy greens and more berries. And this research was looking at cognitive decline and other issues around brain health and aging, and found to be protective. So Dr. Mishley did a comparison of her patient-reported outcomes, or the Pro diet, and the Mediterranean and Mind, and found that the Mind diet and the Pro diet were both were both more correlated. And I would say the biggest difference is just eating more leafy greens, more berries. And then if you are looking at Mediterranean diet pattern, I would, and mind if you're looking at recipes, I would say choose the ones that don't contain dairy products. And that would be kind of another difference looking at the patient-reported outcomes or that pro diet that Dr. Mishley has been doing. If you want a visual, this is something that could be helpful if you're looking at your plate. What would that look like on a plate? So we'd probably want about half of your plate to be full of vegetables. And so we'll talk about this more in detail next week with the plant slant and how to choose more of a plant-based diet and what are some resources for that. Maybe a quarter of your plate might be whole grains and starches. And so some of these like sweet potatoes and winter squash and oats and quinoa and other types of whole grains, brown rice and such, those are going to be protective. And then maybe a quarter of your plate will be protein. We're going to be talking a little bit more about how to balance your protein here in a few minutes with your levodopa. But we'd want to make sure that you're all spreading protein throughout the day, and we'll talk more about the portions that could be helpful. We want to think about healthy fats. So we make our cell membranes out of fats. Our brain is mostly fat, so the type of fat that we eat is really, really important. And so having things like fats like olive oil, nuts and seeds, avocados, these are associated with slower progression. And then there's also this aspect here that we call digestives. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but there are aspects of eating fermented foods that seem to support digestion and immunity and also could be protective for brain health too. So this might be a visual that you could use when you look at your plate. This is an expansion of some of those other aspects that I provided a list on a few slides back. Most of you, if you have been looking at the news, probably heard about the research that was just published around the microplastics that are found in water bottles. And that is something that Dr. Mishley has found correlates with people who are progressing faster as using more plastic. So I would encourage you to think about all of the ways that you might be interacting with plastic in your life, especially with your food and beverages. So trying to, if you're buying beverages, if you can buy them in glass bottles, or if you are bringing water with you, maybe getting a stainless steel container or a mason jar or something that you might carry your water or tea in. Also avoiding cooking in plastic. If you do have something like a frozen meal or something that comes in plastic, to put it in glass or a heat safe container that you could heat it up in versus the plastic. And then storing your food in glass versus, or something like a crock or something versus plastic bags or a plastic container. In general, the more squishy a plastic is, the more those particles will leach into our foods and into our bodies. You can also get wax paper or wax cloth. So there are some cloth material that's been infused with wax that you can fold over your food and store that. So I would encourage you to think about ways to reduce your exposure to plastic. And so hopefully most of you are doing your own cooking. It's really easy now to not cook just by eating out and buying prepackaged foods. But it's really important to be discerning about the quality of those foods if you do that. And we're going to talk about that here in a couple minutes. But I did want to make a case for cooking if some of you are not doing much cooking. I know that for many people, it can feel like a burden, or it can feel difficult, or maybe you don't feel like you have the skills to make food taste good, or maybe you feel like you've done that your whole life and you don't want to do it anymore. But recognizing that health value and that it is one of those aspects that are lifestyle aspects that are associated with people who are progressing more slowly. It doesn't have to be something really complicated. It could be very simple meals. If you need to improve your skills, I'll show you some resources at the end of this slide set as well. And then also there are different types of adaptive equipment that can make it easier as well. I'm a huge fan of an air fryer. I know it's just like a quick condensed convection oven, but it does cook really quickly. I'm also a big fan of these chopper machines. I'm kind of circling it here down in the middle bottom, where if you are having any difficulty with dexterity, you can just put your fruit or vegetable on this contraption and just kind of hit the top of it, and it will chop it for you. So it's pretty convenient, and you can also just put it in the dishwasher. Garlic presses, there are also these types of choppers. And then I'm also a big fan of crock pots. Likely many of you are as well, especially in the winter. It's so perfect to have a nice warm cooked meal. Also helps with digestion. So thinking about these different tools that might be helpful, some people might even use a panini press. I would say that when you're choosing some of these different equipment, like especially the crock pot or maybe the air fryer, to look for those, or maybe a panini press that would be made out of stainless steel or out of materials that don't have those polyfluorinated carbons and things that can infuse into your food, which are also just another burden that your body has to get rid of. So this one is nice because it's all stainless steel, but there's a few different versions that are out there. Pesticides are another one that are having organic food is associated with slower progression. And I know that that can sometimes be more expensive. And so I think the Environmental Working Group is a good organization to know about that helps to track the amount of pesticides in our food. So this is a nonprofit organization, and every year they publish the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. And actually, it's really more than the Dirty Dozen, but the Dirty Dozen is what they create into little cards that you can take with you to the grocery store. But you can see here, these are the foods that have the highest pesticide residue. And it's unfortunate because some of them are berries like cherries and strawberries, and even like purple grapes, that some of these are and these leafy greens that are all very highly associated with people who are progressing more slowly. But these would probably be good foods to make sure that you are getting organic. And we see blueberries are, also here in terms of the pesticide content. The fewest pesticides, avocados. So maybe it doesn't matter if you buy organic avocados, sweet corn, pineapple, papayas, asparagus, kiwis, cantaloupe, cabbage. There's lots and lots of vegetables and fruits as well that have lower pesticide residues. So if you're buying in season, that can also help with the cost, but also thinking about, which are the ones that we might really want to pay attention to getting organic. You can use these lists. This is I know that this is probably small on your screen, but if you have the ability to print this out in a larger format, or like in a slide format where you can see it on a larger scale. I think this is a nice tool here from the Institute for Functional Medicine to help you sort of expand your creativity and the different types of fruits and vegetables that you might eat, because we know that eating fresh fruits and vegetables is really at the top of the list in terms of, people who are progressing most slowly are eating more of these foods. And so I would encourage you to either look in the grocery store, look on this list, and maybe just pick some that you've never tried, or maybe that you don't eat very often. The more variety you have is better. And also lean into those berries and those leafy greens. Leafy greens seem to be very, very important. And if we think about, these different aspects of, why these foods are so important, we're going to be talking more about this concept of phytonutrients next week. But, phytonutrients are components of foods that are separate from the vitamins and the minerals and the proteins. These are what we call, bioactive components. They have activity in our body that helps our body to function at a higher level. And so we can see over here some of the names of these, and you might be familiar with some, like resveratrol. Many people have heard of that one. It comes from red grapes. It's one of the reasons why red wine is so protective. Some of you might have heard of epigallocatechin, which comes from green tea, curcumin, which comes from turmeric. So we see lots of different types of compounds. So all plants have them. And the more that you get and the more variety, the better that your body works. So what these compounds do is they help reduce oxidative stress, which means it protects our tissues from damage and our cells. They reduce inflammation. They can actually regulate whether cells live or die. They can help with getting rid of things we might have been exposed to. They can actually help improve the way our nerves function and maybe even help with growing new connections between our nerves. And they might actually help to reduce the aggregation of alpha-synuclein, which is something that we know is correlated with faster progression of Parkinson's. So these bioactive compounds or these phytonutrients are so important. And that's why the more fruits, vegetables that you can eat, but you also find them in teas and herbs and spices, maybe even more powerfully. So we'll talk more about that next week and talk about lots of different creative ways that you might get those into your diet. Let's spend just a couple of minutes defining processed foods because I want to make sure that we're all kind of clear about how those might be defined and differentiated, because there is a difference between the different types of processed foods that are out there. So if you're eating foods that are that you buy already pre-made, which everyone does, I do that too. Everybody is buying foods that are pre-made. We would encourage you to look for foods that are minimally processed. And so we have, for example, this is a red lentil pasta, and you can see here the ingredients just says red lentil flour. So the flour made out of red lentils is processing, but it's very minimally processed. This is a loaf of bread right here. So we see, unbleached flour. We see all of these different, like this is a very long list, right? If any of you have ever made bread, you probably know it should just probably have, flour, water, yeast, and salt, right? And so here, this is a more highly processed bread. So it's got, different dough conditioners and preservatives and things like that. And then we have ultra processed foods. So ultra processed foods are a food that you would look at the ingredient label and you would have absolutely no idea what it was. So this is a label for Skittles, the candy Skittles. And so there's no way you'd have to look at the package and see what it was called. But you could look at this and say, oh, it's flour, it's got it's got these different grains in it, it's got yeast, it's got salt. Okay, I'm thinking this is probably bread, right? But this would be completely unrecognizable. So that's how I would recommend looking at these different foods. The more minimally processed will probably be more nutrient dense, and it will have less for your body to deal with in terms of added ingredients and things that might not be something that's completely natural. One of the reasons why it's important to think about what goes into your food is that, instead of thinking of your body like a machine, you can think of it like a computer. So our bodies are sensing information, are taking in information and processing it in many ways. And the food that we take into our bodies is also like information. And so the food that we're eating is almost like software that we're running in our computer. So are you putting garbled software into your computer? The more artificial ingredients and colors and unrecognizable in nature compounds that you're putting into your body, the more that your body is having to deal with that, and the less energy it has to help, rebuild and your cells and reduce inflammation and all of its kind of basic functions. It's, microplastics, like all these things that we're introducing to our bodies just make it harder for our bodies to be as healthy as they can be. I do want to say that the goal would be to minimize it as much as possible, to be aware of it. It's not our fault that we have all of this around us. And so I would say do your best. And just know also that if you're eating all of those phytonutrients and bioactive compounds, you're really giving your body a lot of support in terms of being able to handle and process the extra things that you might take in. So another way to define minimally processed foods here, can you identify each ingredient? Does this food have all of its original parts, or has anything been removed? Does each ingredient have an identity? Is it tied to a region, a season, or a culture? Does it have the capacity to spoil or break down? One of my favorite quotes when I was going through my master's program in nutrition was one of my professors said, you know, if your food doesn't rot, you should throw it away. Like if your food won't spoil, then you should throw it away. We've all heard the story of someone who, I think it was in the newspaper not too long ago, where someone found a McDonald's hamburger from like the 1980s in a coat pocket, and it was still looked like a hamburger. That's not what we want our food to do. We want our food to spoil and break down. Would your ancestors recognize it as food? I think that's probably a quintessential question. And so here we have a couple more labels. This is a brand called Bar Foods, where it's just apples and cinnamon. You might have seen it before. They're just dried apples with cinnamon. So clearly that's a minimally processed food. And then we have these Jolly Ranchers, you know, citric acid, potassium citrate, aspartame, artificial flavors, artificial colors, right? So this is just like garbled information that we would put into our computer. I mean, our computer can probably handle some of it, but think about the preponderance of what you're putting in. There are some convenience foods and pantry items that you can keep on hand to make cooking easier. It doesn't mean that you have to make everything from scratch. So luckily, there are a lot of really great options, even though a lot of these are going to be organic and have good quality ingredients and fats. Most of them are stored in containers that I wouldn't recommend that you cook your food in. So I'd still recommend you take them out of the container that they're sold in and put them in glass or a bowl or something before you heat them up. But, you know, some of these are products like salad dressings and marinades, or, you know, some of the heat meat meals. I would just look for those labels and see, can you identify everything? Is it minimally processed? Legumes and beans. We would recommend avoiding cans as much as possible, but we do know that sometimes people eat food out of cans. So trying to get, you know, maybe the BPA-free cans, getting organic if possible, and also looking for options that maybe a bean might come in a jar, or we've seen them in those aseptic containers as well, like the foil pouches. Also, there are a lot of beans that cook really quickly, like lentils and things like that. So next week, we'll talk more about some of the ways to get those plant-based foods in. And I always like to talk about it in terms of, you know, sometimes I think of Maslow's hierarchy of meals is how I describe it. So if you had a lot of time to prepare energy, or if you wanted to just sort of put something together and assemble some ingredients that might make it easier and faster. Dairy alternatives, snacks, and sweets. So these are, you know, some of the things you can keep on hand that would be more in that pro diet plan. If you're looking at labels, as I mentioned before, a lot of times processed foods not only contain ingredients that we might not want in our body, but we'll also find that the quality of carbohydrates and the quality of fats might be problematic. These are both tied to how long a product might last on the shelf. So a whole grain will last less, will have less of a shelf life than a refined grain. And, you know, fats that are more highly processed will last longer on a shelf than more minimally processed fats that have more components in them, like bioactives and things. So looking for, you know, 100% whole grain, looking for fiber, and also looking for how much sugar. So if you're looking at a label, you always want to look at the serving size, because sometimes companies can be a little bit tricky about that. And then look at, you know, the amount of fiber. So for instance, if you have a loaf of bread, or if you are, you know, having a cereal or something, hopefully it has at least 3 to 5 grams of fiber in there. But if it has like 0 or 1, try to find something that might have more fiber. You can also look at the amount of sugars as well, and just know that every 4 grams is 1 teaspoon. So you can add it up. And think, okay, if you're going to be eating a half a cup of something, would you put, you know, almost 3 teaspoons of sugar in that? That would be kind of a lot for a half a cup. So thinking about all of those aspects, and we'll be revisiting some of this as we go through. So if this feels like it's a little bit fast, just know that, you know, this first class I'm sort of describing the concepts that we'll go into more detail on. And then also, does it look like a science project? So, this is actually a salad dressing that I think is from a pretty good company. And you can actually, even though the ingredient list is a little bit longer, you can actually identify almost everything in here. And maybe there's a couple things that you wouldn't have. It's more of like a moderately processed, right? Because most of us probably don't have acacia gum in our, cupboard that we're using. But most of the rest of it is probably stuff that you might have in your cupboard. So I would, assess from that perspective. Some of you might need to be careful about salt. I've seen people who need to increase or decrease their salt. So that's also something that can be problematic with processed foods, is how much salt is in there, because salt is also a good preservative. Most of the time processed foods are meant to be able to be shelf stable, and that doesn't always translate into being healthy. These are some alternatives. I'm not going to go through all of these, but you'll have this as a resource, and we'll talk about them, as we talk about more about meal planning and how to add in different types of foods. But, I made a list of the foods that are associated with faster progression over here, and then some alternatives that you might want to try. So for instance, milk, you could do dairy-free milks. You could do soy milk, but just know that that's a bit high in protein, so just be careful. Cheeses, there's dairy-free. And because I talk to people a lot about this, the Follow Your Heart, Miyoko's, Daya, Violife, and Chow are the ones that people find taste the best. For yogurt, there's some dairy-free versions that are here. Coco June, I think, is probably everybody's favorite, but you can always try different ones to see which ones you like best. For frozen, having fresh, and then you can see some of these different options here. So, using different types of containers to store your foods. For white pasta, maybe there's great like lentil pastas, corn and quinoa, there's brown rice pastas, there's lots of different options. And then, for ice cream, there's options as well. Fried foods, maybe using an air fryer or just baking or roasting, and then trying to be careful about those artificial sweeteners and colors and flavors in foods. So I would recommend, when you get a copy of this, to maybe print this slide or take a look at it in more detail and think about some of those swaps you might want to make. Okay, just a few more slides here. Want to talk about a couple of dietary considerations that are really important. One of them is protein. Since levodopa is a protein-based medication, there is some research that shows that eating protein with the medication or within an hour of taking the medication can be problematic in terms of reducing absorption. So proteins all kind of compete for absorption. And if you're eating dietary protein and you have the medication that's protein-based, it basically can interfere. And so what's recommended is to take your medication on an empty stomach at least 30 minutes before or 60 minutes after. Some people notice that they can feel when their medication is kicking in, and then that might be an indication that it's okay to eat. If you're on an extended release, you might need to be more careful. If you're really having trouble managing your on and off times, sometimes what happens is people will eat a little less protein during the day and just sort of have more of their protein at night. Doesn't mean that you don't eat any protein during the day, because you can't eat all of your protein at once, but we might just, spread it out a little bit more. And that's something that, I'd recommend working with a dietitian or a nutritionist around that, because you might need to have this kind of customized. That's something I do a lot with people, is figuring out, their best pattern. There's also some research that shows that if you take your levodopa with some lemon juice or a little bit of vitamin C, that acidity can help with the absorption of the medication as well. And if you do feel nauseous, you can take it with some crackers or some fruit. These are the foods that have protein. So the highest levels are going to be things like beef and pork and poultry, fish, eggs, firm and extra firm tofu, milk, yogurt, cheese, protein powders. Less concentrated, so meaning there's more fiber and less protein, legumes, nuts, seeds, nut butters, pseudo grains like quinoa, teff, and amaranth. And then least concentrated would be things like whole grain starches, vegetables, and fruits. And so many times people might eat these less concentrated forms during the day when they need to be on a little bit more, and maybe having the more concentrated protein in the evening. Essentially what we typically recommend is, to make sure that you're getting enough protein. You don't want to just completely restrict it, but we might say during the day, maybe you just have about 5 to 10 grams of protein with your breakfast and your lunch and snacks, just so that you don't have a large portion around the time of your medication. That 5 to 10 grams I have listed here, like an egg would be about 7, a half of a deck of cards would be about 10 grams if you're eating fish or something, or any other meat. A half a cup of beans is about 8 grams. A half a cup of like different types of grains is about 4. So you could also keep a copy of this slide just to kind of think about, oh, what would that look like if I was only eating maybe 5 or 10 grams. If you're curious about different foods, there is, from the US Department of Agriculture, if you type in Food Data Central, you can actually pull up this site and you can you can add the portion size, and it will tell you, how much protein is in a serving of, thousands of different foods are in here. So that is a resource that you can do. I do think this list is pretty good and for averages of different types of foods. I tried to put in, for most of the different types of foods, what the average protein would be. You can also use, your hands to kind of estimate like what a cup might look like, or a teaspoon, like if you're having some nuts, just like a shallow cupped hand is going to be, like that amount is probably in the 7 or so grams of protein. If you have a couple tablespoons of peanut butter, that's about 8 grams of protein right there. If you aren't really sure how to, if you're not measuring it, you can kind of use your hands as a measure. Like a half a cup might be like just the top part of your fist, or a whole cup might be your whole fist. If you were looking at, oh, am I getting enough? How much vegetables am I getting? For proteins, typically like the size of the palm of your hand is going to be about 3 ounces. So these are just a few, ways you can measure. And then what this might look like is that, breakfast, maybe 5 to 10, snack, maybe 5 grams, lunch, maybe 5 to 10, dinner, maybe 30 grams, snack, maybe 10 to 20. I do have a handout that I can send to Jen that I've it's a little bit of a like meal plan, so to speak, where it's just giving you an idea of what it would look like for some different meals that would kind of fall into that 5 to 10 gram, and maybe a little heavier for dinner. So, for example, for dinner, maybe you have salad greens with some garbanzo beans and veggies, maybe some sweet potato, maybe dairy-free feta, avocado, whole grain crackers. Like all of this is going to be, less than 10 grams of protein probably. And then at dinner, maybe a fish tacos with black beans and salad. So a little heavier on the proteins there. We'll talk about plant-based diets. We'll go in, I'm going to go over this a little bit more when we talk about plant-based diets next week, because we're going to talk about protein distribution in plant-based foods as well. So this will be something we keep revisiting. There are some resources for meal planning that you could use. So like Mediterranean and Mind, I was mentioning that those are really good if you're looking for recipes and such. There's a lot of vegan plant-based recipes. We'll talk more about those next week too. These are some blogs and such with lots of great recipes. I love the Bean Institute. They've got a lot of great recipes. Cookus Interruptus, all recipes. They have a lot of videos as well. And then if you're really curious about if you're meeting targets or how much you're eating, you can use like online tracking tools like Chronometer is my favorite one. Gives you lots of information about what you're eating, but then you can kind of see what your protein levels are too. There's also some meal delivery services if you need a break. So Daily Harvest or Thistle, they'll deliver these plant-based meals that I think are very much in alignment with the Pro plan. I also sometimes recommend people use artificial intelligence if you're interested in doing that. ChatGPT is a free source that's really great for meal planning, and I've given you a few prompts here. Maybe what we'll do is go over that a little bit more next week too, because I know that this is a lot for the first class, but again, just sort of reviewing some of the different concepts that could be helpful, and then we'll go into some more detail as we go through the class series. So I'm a big fan of using ChatGPT for meal planning. You can put in, like, if you have a few foods, you could say, hey, I'm trying to provide me a recipe for how to use like black beans, quinoa, and sweet potatoes using a mind diet perspective, and it will give you some recipes. So I could maybe even do a little demo on how that works, but it's pretty neat, pretty good at helping you with recipes and such. Just a couple more slides here, and then we can take a few questions. I did want to talk about probably the most common digestive or side effect that I work with people on, which is constipation and digestive issues, because it's very common with Parkinson's and low dopamine to have constipation. And also, the alpha-synuclein can affect the gut and how it functions as well. And so when I'm thinking about constipation, I'm thinking about the 4 F's. That's kind of the mnemonic I think about, which is fiber, fluid, flora, and physical activity, which is a P, but sounds like an F. So that's why I call it that. But these are the things that I'll usually be looking for in people's diets. Like, how can we get fiber, especially like slippery fibers? So those slippery fibers are soluble fibers, things like pectin in fruits, oats, chia seeds, flax, legumes, whole grains, nuts, and seeds are also going to give us a lot of good fiber as well. So following that pro diet is going to already increase your fiber intake, and that's so important. Staying well hydrated, I know this can sometimes be challenging, but spreading it out throughout the day, making sure you're drinking enough, eating some of those fermented foods, those can be really helpful, and then just staying active, because that helps with gut function. I did include a recipe here for chia pudding. Chia seeds are so high in soluble fiber, and they're very slippery, so they can be very helpful. Sometimes people find just adding some of those fibers in food-based ways, it's a great way to kind of keep their gut moving. Fermented foods can also be helpful. Those healthy bacteria in your gut communicate with the cells and the nerves and can kind of help move things along. So, having things like sauerkraut or fermented vegetables, pickles, miso, dairy-free yogurt, kombucha, kefir, apple cider vinegar you might use in a salad dressing. So you can use it as flavoring. It really adds a lot of flavor, especially if you're not tasting or smelling very well. These can just add so much to your food. They're also really nourishing to your gut as well. We'll continue to talk about these types of foods throughout the class series. And then sometimes looking at like your anatomy, if you're sitting versus squatting, that can sometimes make a big difference for people, maybe abdominal massage or a heating pad. Also optimizing like magnesium, or maybe taking a supplement of like psyllium, or maybe sometimes people might need to use something like Miralax or polyethylene glycol. And I would certainly interact with your healthcare team about some of these here, just to make sure that it's the right choice for you. If you do take psyllium, you have to increase your fluid intake with that. But there are lots of resources, and so I just want to say that if you do get constipated, it can contribute to fatigue. It can just make you not feel like your best, and so making sure things are moving properly is really, really important for your overall health. And then these are some things that might help with gut motility. So ginger actually is really powerful. The phytochemicals that are in ginger, they actually stimulate the muscles in your gut to move. So if you like ginger tea, that could be really great. Or you can get like pickled ginger or candied ginger. These are all great, using ginger in your foods. Bitter flavors also, the flavor of bitter stimulates the contractions in the gut. So those green vegetables, which we already know are on that PD Pro diet. Green tea, which is also protective, is also bitter. Chamomile, ginger, roasted dandelion, citrus fruits, which are in season right now, coffee, dark chocolate, turmeric. These are all bitter flavors that can help with digestion. Those fermented foods that we talked about before, those bacteria can help with moving the gut, and then just staying hydrated. So these are, a few things like if you like arugula or turmeric, chocolate, some different teas or citrus. These are all things that can help with gut motility. And then some people might just use bitters. So you can put bitters in warm water and drink them before you eat. And, some people even take them in the morning, which can sometimes help move things along. So these are tinctures that you might take. Double check with your healthcare team that this is appropriate for you. They tend to be very safe. And even just having some green tea can be helpful. The Parkinson School is a school that was set up by Dr. Mishley to help provide more information about her research. And so if you want to check that out, she does monthly classes. There's so much information on there, much more information about the Pro Diet. I also teach a monthly class there as well. And then there's that app that if you wanted to participate in Dr. Mishley's research and also know more about what your score is and some of just kind of how you're progressing in terms of some of those symptoms, you could use that tool as well. So next class, we're going to be talking more about plants, plant-based diets. We'll talk more about protein and fermented foods. We'll keep weaving that in. I'm curious to know if there are any questions that have come up. I know that I was covering quite a bit. So
yeah, there are a couple of questions if you want me to pose them to you, Kelly.
Yeah, I opened up the chat. So
Okay.
why is meat such a big factor? One of the things that Dr. Mishley always says is that this is something that we're reporting on dietary patterns. And so the question here that's not being answered is the why. There are some, if you look at nutritional research, many times in many different studies around, a variety of health conditions, inflammatory conditions, neurological, cardiovascular, metabolic, we see that a heavier meat-based diet is associated with worse outcomes. And I think it could be for a variety of reasons. One could be that if people are eating more meat, often they're eating less vegetables and fruits and other plant-based foods, so they might be correlated with lower fiber. It could be the cooking method. So when we're cooking meats, it does create things like heterocyclic amines and other types of compounds that could be challenging to our body and in some ways associated with inflammation and such. Some meats have higher saturated fats, and that could also be correlated with inflammation. There's some evidence that eating a higher meat-based diet changes our gut flora to be more inflammatory. So I think that those are probably all a factor. And I know that a lot of the people that we work with do eat some animal proteins. And I would say that if you look around the globe, there is pretty much no culture that is completely vegan. And so, I think the matter is to put that in perspective. We'll talk a little bit more about it next time, to think about how can I minimize some of those animal proteins and increase my plant-based proteins and plant-based foods that have all of those bioactives and protective factors. So that would be how I would approach it, thinking about why meat might be more correlated with faster progression. And then why do I think the fruits and veggie capsule that we see on commercial, what do I think about those? I would encourage you to think about those in terms of processing. So, is it, first of all, if you're taking a capsule, which is usually about 500 milligrams, how does that compare with eating like a salad or eating a quantity of fruits and vegetables? So for example, 1 teaspoon is 4,000 milligrams, right? So it's 500 milligrams. You need to have 8 of those capsules to have a teaspoon of vegetables and fruits. And plus, how are they drying them and powdering them and storing them? And we know that the more you break something apart, it loses its integrity, and that integrity of a food is what helps to keep it fresh and vital, right? So I think that there's probably some phytonutrients that you get from those capsules, but there wouldn't be a replacement for eating the fresh foods, for sure. All right. I think that might be all the questions. Certainly can continue, if you think of questions and you're coming next week, or if you want to send them along, either to Jen or to myself at the Seattle Integrative Medicine link there. You can contact me through Seattle Integrative Medicine. I can fold those in. So we can think of ourselves as a group kind of moving through this month, and want to make sure that that you feel like you're getting the information you need. But next week we'll talk more about plants and why they're so protective, and how to get more of those into your diet. All right.
Yes, and there were a couple of questions about how do we print some of the slides from today's presentation. So this, I will share with you, I have all of your email addresses from registration. I will share with you a link to the video, as well as a link to the slides that Kelly presented today. So you will get that in your email. I will also send a reminder out next week with the correct Zoom link in it, so that you can get into next week's program. So it will be same time, same place, Friday at 11 Pacific time. So for those of you who aren't in Pacific time, remember it's 11 a.m. Pacific time. So expect an email from me probably Monday or Tuesday with all of this information, and then we hope to see you next week. So thank you, Kelly, for the first of 3 more of these. And so much information and really great. I never really thought about using Chat GPT to help me with my meal planning. Like that was like blew my mind. So
it's so good at it. It's really good at it. And the thing is, you can just say, I don't like that. Can you do it this way? Or can you make it without, can you give me a recipe without this? And actually, I just was working with somebody with some alternative flours and such, and we came up with a muffin and had Chat GPT give us the recipe, and she made it and she said it tasted pretty good. So, so it's, it could be hit or miss.
Controversy over Chat GPT, but it does do good things as well. So that's awesome. So I am going to go feed this sophisticated computer that is my body.
Yeah.
So I hope the rest of you have a wonderful weekend, and we hope to see you next week. And thank you, Kelly, very much. And we will see you next week as well.
My pleasure. Good to see
All
you
right.
all.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.